We left off about verse 41 last week. We'll start in verse 40 just to get the background. After they called in the apostles and had them flogged, they ordered them not to speak in the name of Jesus and released them. And we know how that went, don't we? We know that they didn't listen. We know that they went out and taught. We know that they did what they were supposed to do. Then they went out from the presence of the Sanhedrin, rejoicing that they were counted to be worthy to be dishonored on behalf of the name. So they were rejoicing in the fact that they'd been flogged. It takes a big man to do that, doesn't it? I couldn't do it. I'm too wimpy for that. It's just, I can't imagine being flogged and then rejoicing because of it. Then verse 42, every day in the temple complex and in various homes, they continued teaching and proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Messiah. And on my way to church this morning, I added a note to that I didn't have. I didn't have a note on this verse until today. But I got to thinking about this some. This is evangelism, isn't it? This is going out and teaching and preaching and bringing others to Christ and evangelizing. So what are some barriers to us doing that today? Because I think it's very plain to see that we're not going out every day of the week and teaching in someone's home or coming here to the church and teaching or putting it out on Facebook somewhere every day. So why not? Our possessions sometimes get in the way. Sure. So other things kind of crowd it out, don't they? I've got that listed under here in my notes as priorities. Sometimes our priorities change. Mark? Fear. What kind of fear? Okay, fear of rejection. I actually didn't put that one in my notes. That's a good one. What other fear is there? We live in a world of psychopaths. Or at least that's what the news would have us to believe, don't we? So are we as willing to accept strangers into our homes or go into the homes of strangers as we used to be? No. There's some fear there associated with that, isn't there? Mark shared a video with me on an evangelism thing, and the guy talked about, I don't invite people to my home anymore. I've got 3 small kids. I don't know who I'm inviting in. So if I decide to try to speak to them about God's word, I invite them to dinner at a restaurant, and do it that way rather than inviting them to my home. That's a real concern, isn't it? Because we do have to protect our family, and we do know that there are psychopaths out there. Not everyone is one, thankfully, but there are some out there. So what other things could potentially get in our way? Clinton? Yeah, that's true too, isn't it? You start quoting the Bible and people get offended. And Clinton mentioned the message boards and stuff. I haven't been on a message board in years because the people that tend to populate those things are hateful, arrogant. You try to say something, you're going to have 15 people argue with you from step one. It's not pleasant, What else could we be looking at? I think there's among some of us, if not all of us, a sense of, I don't know if I can answer their questions or not. What if they ask questions that I don't know the answer to? What if I tell them something wrong? There's that fear there, isn't there? Yeah, there's some of that concern, isn't there, of what if I tell them wrong? What if they ask a question I don't know the answer to? And what happens when you guys ask me a question I don't know the answer to? Because y'all have done that to me before. Y'all have surprised me and thrown me a question I didn't have an answer for.
Well, there's nothing wrong with saying I don't know.
Right. I say, I don't know. Let me get back to you next week on that. Let me do some study on that. And that I don't know why we've had such a hard time in this day and age of saying, I don't know. It pervades everything out there. If you listen to the news people, they seem to have all the answers. If you read the newspapers, if you still get the newspaper, they seem to have all the answers. The Monday morning quarterbacks, critiquing the football coach on Monday, certainly have all the answers. I don't know why we can't just say, I don't know. But those are probably one of the set of 3 most important words that we could use. Just that admission that we need to learn some more. Having that pride, not pride, having that humility to admit that I don't know everything. So whatever the reason, whether it be busy schedules, I put that in there. I don't know about y'all, but we're busy, right? We have lots of things to do. Even those of you that are retired, you have 15,000 doctor appointments, and other appointments that you have to keep up with. There's always stuff going on. We mentioned changing priorities. We talked about the psychopaths, the fear of people, the lack of interest. There's some apathy out there, isn't there? People don't care to learn about God anymore. Now, there are people that do. There's still people studying, still people willing to learn. There was a baptism in Nikita's prison ministry just last week. So there are people still interested, but there is a definite apathy out there. The belief that we don't know enough to answer questions. There's a lot of reasons we can put up that we don't want to do that. But I would encourage us to do it anyway. I would encourage us to do what the apostles here did and say, I don't care that they flogged me. I'm going to go out and teach. I don't have access to every person on the planet. I just don't. There are people that you have access to that I don't have access to that I can't teach. But that's okay, because there are other people that can. And I would encourage you to study, and learn and become comfortable with speaking to people. Some people do better in a one-on-one setting. Some people do better in a group setting. So it doesn't really matter. There's always people out there. If you find someone that's interested and you don't feel like you can sit down and teach them, then contact one of us. Your dad or myself or Dustin or Tom or whoever, and let's go together and teach that person. And let's see what we can do to bring other souls to Christ. And I didn't mean to bring this out as a guilt complex or anything, but it's just an encouragement. We can do better. All of us can do better in teaching those around us. All right, so that's the end of chapter 5. Are there any more thoughts for discussion in chapter 5 before we move on to chapter 6? Now, chapter 6 is relatively short by comparison to the chapter before and after it. But it's relatively short, but it has some really important truths we need to discuss. This is the first time that we see leadership distributed, other than Jesus calling the apostles. This is leadership distributed. Well, Moses too. Yeah, Moses. So yeah, Moses did that. Are there any other examples? Father-in-law suggestion. But Moses spread out the responsibility, and that's where the Sanhedrin came from. It's from, that was what developed into the Sanhedrin on down the line. So this was a distribution of leadership that was necessary as things grew beyond what the apostles could handle on their own. So let's go and start in verse 1, and we'll talk about that as we go through here. In those days, as the number of the disciples was multiplying, there arose a complaint by the Hellenistic Jews against the Hebraic Jews that their widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution. So let's talk about the distribution to the widows. We're commanded. Let me just go ahead and pull this up here. I've got extensive notes on this, by the way. James 1:27. We're commanded to care for widows and orphans. There is no question about that. Now, this was two ethnic groups that were complaining here. The Hellenistic Jews were the non-Hebrew Jews, the proselytes that felt like their widows were being neglected. Does that still occur? It certainly can it, Lowell?
Well, the Hellenistic Jews were basically Greek-speaking.
Mm-hmm. Right. Basically Greeks. But they were being neglected. So what did they do? We'll see here in verse 2 that they've talked to the apostles about that. Okay? So when the apostles have to deal with this, let me go, and I'm going to skip stuff if I don't go in order. I don't know how long this period lasted in these chapters. I've seen estimates of 4 to 5 years that this teaching and preaching went on around Jerusalem. And it's certain that complaints will arise in any time such as this. You get a large growth, there's going to be some complaints. There's going to be some things that aren't being done well that we're fine with the small group, not so fine with the big group. Everyone has responsibility in this kind of situation. The ones who feel aggrieved have the responsibility to not sit around and grumble. We're really good at that, aren't we? We're really good about sitting around and complaining about what's wrong and what's not right, and that this isn't being done the way it should be done. But what does Philippians 2:14 tell us? Do everything without grumbling and arguing. Sounds like a command, doesn't it? Sounds like a command. Do everything without grumbling and arguing. So how do we deal with that then? How do we deal with these complaints that come up? We address it, don't we? We don't let it sit and fester. We don't say, if we ignore it, it'll go away. Sometimes you can get away with that. Sometimes you can't. But we're to do all things without disputing. This was done to protect the image and reputation of the church. So if we start backbiting and fighting amongst ourselves, who's going to be the first one to find out about it? Those outside this church. And who's going to be the first one to hold that against us? Those outside this church. So we need to do everything without grumbling or disputing. We need to do this so that we can handle things well. David? Oh, you're kidding. There's people you can't please? That's what you've been told, huh? You know, there is that fact, isn't there? There is the fact that some people can never be pleased. We deal with them in the office sometimes. No matter what you do, you're not going to make them happy. You can bend over backwards and it don't matter. They're still not going to be happy. But you do the best you can, don't you? You do the best you can. We don't try to complain to others and build support for our position. We don't try to split the church or anything along those lines. We go to the leaders and discuss it. You know, as an elder, I would hope if you have any questions, comments, concerns, irritations, things like that, that you would come and talk to me. I promise I don't bite. I do kick every now and then, but I won't bite. You know, because maybe it's something that we need to look at. Maybe it's something where you've misunderstood something that we are doing. Maybe it's something you don't know about that we're doing in the background that we just don't publicize. But we need to address that. We don't need to let it sit there and fester. If you come to one of us with a problem, ideally you come with the solution to the problem. That's leadership 101. The first thing we're going to do is ask you what you think we need to do. How can we fix this? What can we do to make it better? Maybe you got good ideas. Maybe it's something we hadn't thought of and we need to discuss. So then it's the responsibility of us as leaders to listen with an open mind and with a great concern for those that we serve. You know, if we sit there and we don't listen to you and we ignore you and we blow you off and we talk about you behind your back about how ignorant your complaints are, we're not really very good leaders, are we? David? Oh, yeah? Mm-hmm. so we do have to try and apply some wisdom to it. So this doesn't mean that as leaders we just say, yeah, go do whatever you want to do and go on. We look into it. There are some criticisms that are legitimate, some are not. We as leaders should be prepared to fix whatever is shown to be wrong. Sometimes there's no opposition to change. Sometimes there is opposition to change. Who in here likes change? I don't see a single hand in the air. Who's out there anxious to change things every other day and do something different every other day? There's a few people out there that are crazy enough to want to do that, but I'm not one of them. You know, we don't like change, and sometimes it'll be unpopular. This complaint here is important, okay? This is the widows being neglected and not properly cared for. This is a big deal. As we looked at, or as we'll look at here in James, it is a command that we care for them and the orphans. But was this just a New Testament thing? Was this something that was only concerning to God in the times of the New Testament? It's always been a concern, hasn't it? It always has been a concern. So let's look at some scriptures today, and we'll see exactly how big a concern it has been to God over the course of years. So let's go ahead and look at James 1:27. Pure and undefiled religion before God and our Father is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. Pure and undefiled religion. That's what we all want, isn't it? We want to follow God with a pure heart. We want to do His will. This is part of it. Go ahead, Will.
Does the word distress have any meaning in that sentence?
Sure it does. It wouldn't be there otherwise.
Right.
So there are, did I put that in here? There are some guidelines laid down. Yeah, it's down there at the end, 1 Timothy chapter 5. We'll read that passage here in a little bit. There's some guidelines to follow on this. If someone's widowed at the age of 25 and they have remarried and they're gainfully employed and they're doing fine, the church's responsibility is over, isn't it? There's nothing more we need to do. So we'll look at that some as we get toward the end. But let's look at Psalm 68, verse 5. God in His holy dwelling is a father of the fatherless and a champion of widows. That was from very old times, wasn't it? He's a champion of widows. Psalms 146, verse 9. The Lord protects foreigners and helps the fatherless and the widows, but He frustrates the ways of the wicked. So he protects the widows, doesn't He? 2 Kings 4. We'll read 7 verses here. One of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, has died. You know that your servant feared the Lord. Now the creditor is coming to take my 2 children as his slaves." This is distress, isn't it? This is about as distressful as it gets, doesn't it? So what does Elisha do? Elisha says, "What can I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house?" She says, "Your servant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil." Then he said, "Go and borrow empty containers from everyone, from all your neighbors. Don't just get a few. And go in and shut the door behind you and your sons and pour all the oil into these containers. Set the full ones to the side." So after she left, after she shut the door behind her and her sons, they kept bringing her containers, and she kept pouring. When they were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another container." But he replied, "There aren't any more." Then the oil stopped. Luke 7, verse 11. Soon afterward, he was on his way to a town called Nain. His disciples and a large crowd were traveling with him. Just as he neared the gate of the town, a dead man was being carried out. He was his mother's only son, and she was a widow. A large crowd from the city was also with her. What did Jesus do? Brought him back to life, didn't he? So we start to get a sense of how important this is to God, don't we? Deuteronomy 14. At the end of every 3 years, bring 1/10 of all your produce for that year and store it within your gates. Then the Levite who has no portion or inheritance among you, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow within your gates may come and eat and be satisfied. Deuteronomy 24, verse 19. When you reap the harvest in your field and you forget a sheaf in the field, do not go back to get it. It is to be left for the foreigner, for the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. So leave some food in the field. Exodus 22. You must not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you do mistreat them, they will no doubt cry to me, and I will hear their cry. My anger will burn, and I will kill you with the sword. So, what do we think? Pretty important, isn't it? Pretty important. And I didn't exhaust the scripture on this. This is not a comprehensive list. So 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 3. Support widows who are genuinely widows. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, they must learn to practice godliness toward their own family first, and to repay their parents, for this pleases God. The real widow, left all alone, has put her hope in God and continues night and day in her petitions and prayers. However, she who is self-indulgent is dead even while she lives. Command this also, so they won't be blamed. But if anyone does not provide for his own, that is his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. No widow should be placed on the official support list unless she is at least 60 years old, has been the wife of one husband, and is well known for good works. That is, if she has brought up children, shown hospitality, washed the saints' feet, helped the afflicted, and devoted herself to every good work. But refuse to enroll younger widows, for when they are drawn away from Christ by desire, they want to remarry, and so on and so forth. So we see some limitations here on this, don't we? They apparently had a list of widows that they supported, that they provided for however they needed to be provided for. So, how do we handle this practically today? Well,
Do you think the 60-year-old limit was something from that time or something that we apply today?
so was it an exact number that we need to listen to? Was there something magical about the age of 60? Or is it maybe for someone who was in a massive car accident, their husband was killed, they can no longer work, and they have no family to help support them? Do we apply that age 60 rule to them? Or do we help? I don't think so either. I don't see this as a magic number of, well, you turn 60, now you can be on the roll. Or you turn 60, you can be on the roll even though you don't need it. Because we know lots of 60-plus-year-olds that can work and support themselves, grow a garden, all that good stuff. Well,
I think at that time, during those days, at 60, the woman most likely would not be remarried or would not be able to find a husband at that
Sure.
point.
Sure.
And we have to realize that, was it 70? That was pretty accurate at that time.
Mm-hmm.
God did use his blessings on a few people that helped them live longer.
Mm-hmm.
But at 60, more likely a man is going to say, well, she don't know live another 10 years.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. You know, I had a lady in my office the other day, this was just last week, that she was 63, I believe, and she had a lot of medical issues. And she told me that her husband left because he said, and I quote, "I didn't marry a cripple." Yeah. So that stuff happens, doesn't it? That stuff happens. Makes you sick to your stomach, but it does. So we apply this and do the best we can, don't we? We apply some wisdom. What about the widow who has children or grandchildren, but they live over in Africa, and she sees them once a year and they don't have anything to do with her?
Be the same if they lived next door and still wouldn't have any.
And still wouldn't have anything to do with her, would it? Basically, she is childless at that point, isn't she? So we have to use some of our wisdom here in these things that were laid out to Timothy about who we do and who we don't support in this role as a widow. We allow love to guide our decisions, don't we? We allow grace and mercy to define what we do.
There's a question here in this that's relevant today within the church as with whose responsibility this is, whether it's widows or whether it's orphans or might need to be that are obviously in need.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the church responsibility or is it an individual responsibility? There are those that believe strongly that that's an individual responsibility and not a church responsibility.
Mhm.
And therefore, to take church funds for anything other than evangelism, preaching the word,
Mm-hmm.
would be an unscriptural thing to do. To use it to buy food for others or to provide shelter for others. Individuals need to do that, but you can't take money out of the treasury to do those kinds of things. So we have a split within the church over that kind of issue.
Sure.
Whether it's individual or whether it's church.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like it's church.
That's what it looks like to me, doesn't it?
It looks
Yeah.
like it's individual.
Yeah, it's both, isn't it?
And we have opportunity, we're to do good, especially to those that are counsel of faith. We do that individually, we do that in the church as well.
Right.
Not every member of the church, not every Christian is able to reach beyond their immediate needs of their family or themselves, to have enough left over to take care of two kids.
Right.
Not every family would be able to or eligible to adopt children,
Right.
because that again is the answer that they provide. It's an individual responsibility. You need to bring children into your home.
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't believe in the church support of Paragon Home or Moral or
Right.
those kinds of places, at least not with church funds.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this distinguishing between church money and individual money. It's your money, you can do what you want to with it. If it's in the church treasury, then its use is restricted.
Sure. So how do we separate that out? You know, in this passage here, I don't see how there can be any question that this was being done as the church as a whole.
Gave deacons specific
Right.
responsibilities. Take care of it.
They assigned a specific group of people to take care of them from among the church. This was not okay, Stephen, you go do this, and Philip, you go do this, and Nicholas, you go do this. This was you 7 guys get together and you make sure these widows are taken care of. And I don't see how anyone can say that this was not done in the church as a whole. Now, they will, and I struggle with that. But this was to be done individually too. Do we assist individually? Yes, we do. I've seen examples of that no one else knows about. That members of this church have helped widows because it was the right thing to do, and they wanted no credit for it. They wanted nothing done about it, but they went and did what they needed to do. But we also take it seriously as a church, don't we? We don't have any old ladies' homes around here that are specifically set aside for widows like we do for the orphans. So this has to be done more on an individual, one-on-one basis with the widows. Yes. Right. Sure. And that's what the church is a big family, isn't it? Yeah. So Jesus did that from the cross, providing for his mother. Told John to take care of her. So I don't know, like I said, there's not a single solution for everything here. There is disagreement about this. There are some that feel very strongly that we shouldn't use church funds. We do that every month here. We use church funds to support orphans. We don't have a group of funds going to any specific group because there is no group for widows that I'm aware of. But we support widows as needed. Sometimes it's monetarily, sometimes it's with work around their house, sometimes it's work on a vehicle, but the needs are provided for. And we need to deal with that.
Our society today is so different from what existed during the days of the early church in terms of caring for people. There wasn't any social system. elderly or widows or orphans
Mm-hmm.
during the day when you're in church. It was simply needing
Yeah.
families to care or something like that. So there's an exorbitant number of widows that, like you say, couldn't work, didn't have any family left.
Mm-hmm.
And so to tell somebody to help those people, they couldn't apply for, didn't have social security, couldn't apply for welfare, or anything like that.
Right.
Like we have today. So much of that burden has been lifted from the church because of social programs that exist. We have to be conscious as the church to seek out amongst ourselves within the community those that actually do need help
Mhm.
beyond what is willing to be provided. When we have people that come in off the street here, off the highway, streets, they're coming off the highway asking for some financial help. They're traveling through or doing whatever, and so they want us to give some financial help. We have a list of services that are provided, right, Cheryl?
Mhm. Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay. So we set aside several years ago, this has not been recent, we've got some money set aside in a benevolence fund. Mike and Jeff oversee that for us and have done for several years, do an excellent job of that. But they oversee those funds. We keep funds in there so they can meet needs as they arise. Sometimes people come to us, we're not going to finish talking about this today. We'll have to pick it back up next week. When we are presented with a need, we have to look at all the available possibilities. The city of Fort Smith, I don't know if y'all have seen it in the news, but panhandling is a huge problem in the city of Fort Smith. I've told you before that I know a lady that did that. I don't know if she's still doing it, but she did it just for fun. She didn't need the money, and she told me that. She said, I don't need the money. I just like to get out there and talk to people. So she chose that as her social outreach, where she could spend some time and get to socialize a little bit. But they started putting out signs, it's better to give your money to these organizations rather than give it to the individual, because these organizations will provide shelter, they'll provide work training, they'll provide medical care, they'll provide all these things that you giving this person $5 on the corner is not going to do for them. Now, there's been some kickback on that, of course. As you can imagine, not everyone's happy about that, especially not the folks that are standing out there on the street corners. But that's what we do here. If it's something that can be a need that can be met by a community resource, we want to point them to those resources. That's why it's not a month-to-month drain on the church's financial situation. So we've got a list back there in the office of all the different community resources that are available. Most of them are in Fort Smith, of course, because that's the largest city around here. But there is a huge number of resources that are available. Some of them are coming from the churches. And we could spend a lot of time talking about what those are, but just know that if you find someone that's in need, there are resources available. And if they choose not to make themselves use those resources, then I'm not sure that we should choose to allow them to use ours. Because there are community resources available for a lot of things. So that is also something that comes down to a measure of wisdom, isn't it? Where we decide who we will and who we won't help. We've had people before, and they're not here anymore, but that every month it was something new. Every time we turned around, they were needing money for this or they were needing money for that. And, there comes a time where we just have to say, you need to figure it out. You need to figure it out. You need to make some changes in your budget. We offer them these resources on how you can budget better and how you can better account for the money you've got coming in versus what you've got going out. And they choose not to do that. Because why? It's hard. It's hard. So have there been times where we've said, no, this is the last time you're going to receive help. I can't even talk. This is the last time you're going to receive help from this church. Yes, there has been. We have absolutely done that. because we felt like we had to. It's a part of helping them to grow and mature as an individual, isn't it? Sometimes parents have to cut off the safety net, don't we? When children are of age and they need to learn to handle things on their own, and maybe we don't go bail them out of jail this time. Let them figure it out for themselves. Or bail them out of a financial mess. Those are hard decisions to make, Lowell.
Well, I know the times that we have said no, this is the final one, is because they weren't making good decisions.
Sure.
They were abusing the
Sure.
situation.
They abuse the situation. Like I said, they chose not to make themselves use the resources that are available from outside the church. So again, a great deal of wisdom and prayer goes into these kinds of things and into making sure that the needs are met and doing our best not to overlook God's command to care for folks, especially those of the household of faith. So we do this, we think about this a lot, we study about this a lot. It's a big concern. It's something we've spent a lot of time on.
Larry made a statement that I really hadn't considered, to look out into the community to widows that need help.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they may not be a member of this church, was
Sure.
the implication that I got out of it.
Yeah,
And I never had considered that, and that may be a responsibility that we overlook.
sure.
I never had considered it.
Yeah. That's something where those of us in leadership are going to have to rely on you guys. If you see a need, let us know so we can try to address it. One of the points I wanted to make is, we open up the building downstairs during times of storms to use as a shelter. I mentioned to Dad with that cold snap we had recently that we might need to think about opening that up as a warming center too. If there's a need for that in this area, that's something we could do. But, if you see a need out there that needs to be met, and you know that need, I encourage you to meet that need. If you can't meet that need, if you don't have the financial resources to meet that need, then come see us. Let us meet that need. Don't feel like you have to get our permission either. Okay? So if you see someone that's without power for an extended period during the storms, and you have a key to the building, you might let us know, so that we can make sure no one else is using the building. But let's make use of the building. Let's do what God has called us to do. There was a situation in Mansfield where people were without water, and one of our guys was helping with that, and I said, well, come to the church building and fill those tanks. I said, no problem, don't worry about that. And they said, well, they won't let us come there because it's the same water supply, so we have to go to Fort Smith to get it. But think about that stuff. Let's talk about that some more next week and see how we can meet the needs of those around us. Thank you for your time this morning.